Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and now I'm back to full-time streaming. I've actually had some time to play the upper tier Japanese heavy tanks. I've managed to work my way towards tier 10, and today you are going to be seeing my first gameplay, at least on YouTube, in the tier 8 and the tier 9 Japanese heavies. So now we're up towards the high tier or the top tier kind of vehicles. Well, I guess the top tier is going to be the tier 10. These are more of the high tier Japanese new heavies. So the Type 57, this one looks like an absolute weirdo. Look at this thing's armor. It's absolutely bizarre. It's angled in such really weird ways that when you're shooting at it, it's very confusing. It's kind of a bit like an Object 257 within that regard. And really, when you're shooting at this vehicle, it's just about trying to find the flattest plate. I mean, it's like that with all tanks, really, in World of Tanks. But this one especially, if it's angled like this, you want to shoot bizarrely here, but not actually shoot the lower plate, as that one can be a little bit of a bait. So the Type 57 has a big old gun upgrade over the previous tank at tier 7. Now you're hitting for 360, and you've got some pretty darn decent penetration compared to its little baby brother. 360 alpha with 225 standard pen and 252 gold pen. Now that gold pen, I guess it's a little bit disappointing compared to some, but that standard pen is very nice. This is actually pretty okay for a free-to-play player. You can sometimes get up to more like the 230, 235 mark for tier 8 heavies. It's just a decent gun. Firstly, when I played this vehicle, I thought it was going to hit for 320, so I was pleasantly surprised when I was doing those 360 alpha damage chunks. But by far, the best thing about this vehicle is that you have 12 degrees of gun depression, but no hydropneumatic suspension. This isn't kind of like 7 degrees plus 5, or it's not 8 degrees plus 4. It's pure 12 degrees of gun depression that I believe is all around the vehicle. And so that is just super flexible, especially over the front. Look at what you can do with this thing's armor. You could make it just this absolute little cockroach of a ridgeline that is incredibly tricky to dig out. And then when you combine it with this double aiming mechanic that all of the Japanese heavy tanks have, as you can see, well, of the new Japanese heavy tanks, I think once you get above tier 7, or is this the first one that has the double aiming mechanic? I don't even know if the tier 7 had the double aiming mechanic. I know that the tier 8, 9, and 10 ones do, and I don't think the tier 6 did. I digress. Like, you can see that I've taken too much time off actually playing World of Tanks recently. But this double aiming mechanic on a ridgeline can be really nice, because unlike other vehicles where you don't get any kind of like more dangerous, really, apart from say auto reloaders, where if you reload then you can kind of keep that magazine going. This one, if you have enough time to just sit on a ridgeline and nothing's happening, then you can prepare a really accurate shell with 0.28 base accuracy, making it, I think, the joint most accurate heavy tank in the game. However, you would have to wait for a 16-second cooldown to be able to get that peak accuracy. Whereas if you want to unload at the vehicle's regular rate of fire, or maximum rate of fire, which is 11.4 base, you can have 0.42 accuracy. So you can literally see in the center of your screen just how the reticle changes. So you can see it's regular there, and then later on I'll pause and you can see just the difference between 0.28 and also 0.42. It is massive. And so these Japanese heavies are a bit of a weirdo, because this tank especially, it doesn't have very good damage per minute, especially compared to its bigger brother that I'm going to be playing next. However, when you also think that it doesn't have very good damage per minute and it doesn't have very good accuracy until we wait just a few extra seconds, then you'll see that the circle gets smaller. And I'll pause there. That is the difference between 0.42 and 0.28. And one of the interesting things about this is it basically visualizes what kind of improving your accuracy with things like vents, premium consumable, or if you're using an aiming device, or if you're using field mods, will do for a vehicle. And when you're moving the reticle around on the screen, when you've got this double aiming mechanic, although it can be quite hard to see, you realize that improving the raw accuracy of a vehicle is sometimes even better than improving the gun handling of a vehicle, if a vehicle has pretty good gun handling but horrible accuracy. So, the Type 57. Just so flexible on a ridgeline. I love the fact that it doesn't have a hydropneumatic suspension, which makes it feel very clunky. It kind of feels a bit like a T32, but just even a little bit better within that regard, with higher alpha and 2 extra degrees of gun depression. Now, of course, you do have to have a weak point on top of this vehicle, and the turret armor, I wouldn't say, is as good as the T-32 against high-tier vehicles, especially high-tier vehicles that are firing gold. And the hull armor, well, it's definitely a lot more troll than the T-32, but sometimes it can actually end up being worse, because even if you do use the gun depression on the tank, you do kind of create these funky angles. Like sometimes they'll be able to shoot up into the flap if you are using your full 12 degrees. So I was really happy with the crossplay that I made here to try and create more angles on my opponents. Now I'm just keeping an eye on the Super Pershing, looking for a shot on the Skoda T25, but I'm actually going to decide... Oh, I was thinking about shooting the IS there for a second, because I knew that the Skoda, when they're firing standard rounds, couldn't deal with me. I'm expecting the Super Pershing to come after me, and now the IS-2S manages to actually get a shot right through my side. And there you go, I'm over-angled, and they managed to get the shell into this vehicle. It's a bit of a weirdo, because if you don't angle, the lower plate's quite poor, but if you do angle, then the side, you just have these really weird plate angles on this vehicle. It is, I think I've already said in this video, it is an enigma, and it does take a while to get used to, especially when you're shooting at it. So make sure you're using the penetration indicator on the center of your screen when you're trying to suss out how to deal with a Type 57. So unfortunately, with that shot that I received, I am now down to being a one-shot for most of the enemy team here. I'm going to use intuition to switch out to gold because things have got serious. And while I don't necessarily need the gold, when the game is this close where you're down by 1,800 hit points and you're equal on tanks, every single shot could be the game. So you can see when I'm moving there, even without sort of the vert stabs on this tank, and rewind that part of the video if you want to see what I'm talking about. When you're double aimed, you can see the difference of base accuracy. A lot of people have a funny idea with dispersion values when you're moving, that they're just like a raw value, but they're actually an additive. The way that the dispersion factors work is they add to the reticle size when you're moving, and depending on how quick you are, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Hence why on something like a CS63, the accuracy can look horrendous when you're inside that turbo mode. Not just because it gets worse dispersion values, but because you're moving really, really quick. However, with this double aiming mechanic, it literally is the proof of what people have been figuring out for a while, that improving the accuracy, irrelevant of improving your dispersion values when you're moving, just makes your reticle much more efficient. Okay, so this game is as close as it gets. We're up by a frag, but we're down by... Well, we're not up by a frag anymore. We're down by 1,700 hit points, but luckily, the sacrifice that the Alpine Tiger made, I'm not going to miss that shot with 0.28 accuracy. I feel like a Tiger 2 within that regard. And with a bit of cheeky angling, we managed to ricochet the 703 too. And now it's a 3 versus 3, but we're down again by 1,000 hit points. The STA-1 gets a good shot into the 703-2, and I decide that I have to fire clutch there. Worried that the 703 was going to finish me off. And now, with a Top Gun to my name, we're in a 3 versus 2, but again, we're still down on a hit point deficit. I was thinking that the VK was going to make their way in, and now the Pantera comes. So in this situation, what I have to do is just make sure that I don't get isolated. So that's why I'm backing off. When you're in these situations, you just want to hold your position. Unless, of course, you think you can go in and ricochet everything. But I'm not confident that I can ricochet the Pantera. Stay outside the render distance. Or not the render distance. The proxy spotting distance ring that you see on the minimap. So you create an ambush and then try and catch and try and whittle down your opponents. And slowly but surely, all of those hit points that they had have now been lost. Okay, so what I also have to make sure that I don't let happen is that I allow the enemies to isolate my friends without me having a little bit of a crossfire on them. So I'm thinking about flanking, but clearly this VK is committing around the corner. So I finish them off, and now it's me and an STA-1 against a Pantera. So in this situation, I'm going to make a push play, and unfortunately that is going to allow the Pantera to isolate the STA-1. But luckily the STA-1 did their job. They managed to shoot the Pantera, and so now I can take a hit from the Pantera and they can't take a hit from me. So as long as I take my time, Pantera has to make a play there, and we finish off the Pantera picking up 5,000 damage and getting a cheeky Radley Walters medal for the Type 57. It's a good tank. It definitely has some issues. Its damage per minute isn't great, and that's when you're firing at full speed. And when you're firing at full speed, the accuracy of 0.42 is horrendous. However, in your slow, long-winded games, this is a very strong tank on a ridge. It just has issues when it's pressured by something like a BZ-176, or if it's all-in by an autoloader, or if there's a really high damage per minute heavy like a Renegade just wanting to trade with it. That's where this thing falls apart. And then you don't have the best gun handling, you don't have the best view range, so you can't really get up to a decent spotting distance unless you have a really good crew and a premium consumable. On top of this, you don't have the best ground resistances or engine power, so you don't have the best mobility. It's just a solid tier 8. And it's very, very strong. And if you're a good player in the right situation, you'll do very well with this vehicle. But I don't think it's in any way overpowered like I was thinking it was going to be. Nevertheless, it's a strong tank. It's perfectly playable. It's worth investing in. And so do not skip this tank. Big shout out to the STA1 on my team. I contacted them after the game. I couldn't have managed to get through this one without you, my friend. And it was sweet to pick up my first ace tanker in this vehicle for 1,600 base. Radley Walters for those 8 kills. And we made a half decent profit, even with resupplying some of those premium rounds we were using. All in all, I rate this one highly. I think it's the best of the bunch so far up the Japanese tank tree. And just to clarify my confusion, the tier 7 doesn't get the double aiming mechanic. And so it was indeed the first, aka the Type 57, that you get to experience it, so it might take some getting used to. Okay, so now we're going to be playing in the tier 9. This is the Type 68, and boy, does it look like a typical tank, you know? Turret, hull, flat shapes, angled frontal hull, decent looking vehicle, and that's what this tank is. It is a decent tank. Once you get this vehicle compared to the previous one, there are some things that are instantly noticeable, and that is the improved engine power that this vehicle has. Your engine power is now up to nearly 17 horsepower per ton, which allows you to quickly navigate maps, including upslopes, to contest the hill, as we're going to have here on Malinovka. The other thing that you'll notice about this tank is it has a hydropneumatic suspension, and that's not a good thing unless you get more gun depression, which is not the case. You've got the same 12 degrees of gun depression as the previous tank, but this time it's 8 degrees plus 4 degrees of gun depression. Now, the only advantage that a hydropneumatic suspension will bring is usually your elevation angles will be impressive, and yes, you can do some pretty good stuff with the gun elevation on this vehicle, because you can tilt it up, and that will allow you to be able to engage tanks that are above you, and also keep your armor a little bit more efficient against those vehicles. But all in all, how often are you shooting up at tanks above you and thinking about your armor? And even with the way that you can elevate this vehicle to +4 with the hydropneumatic suspension, it's still not going to protect your top tank. The other thing that's good about this vehicle is that your gun caliber has got larger. You're up to 120mm now, and that gives you 400 alpha damage. The penetration has also increased substantially to 250 on its standard rounds and 311 on its premium rounds, which means that if you do load the gold on this tank, that you are going to be able to compensate for the enemy's armor, or at least just your lack of aim. And you've still got that wonderful .28 base accuracy when you're fully aimed, which is great as well. Another thing that you'll notice is that this tank is pretty much reloading the same, if not actually, it's reloading faster than the previous vehicle, even though its alpha damage has gone up. And that's because your DPM has gone from 1,800 on the previous tank up to 2,400 on this. So this tank is identical to the M103 with regards to its firepower capacity when it's firing at full speed. So if you're wondering where I'm aiming there, I'm aiming not only through the tracks, but up into the flaps that run, or of the hull armor that run above the tracks. And then I'm hoping now that I'm going to be able, I'm thinking, should I track him, wait for him to turn? And then I think, nah, I'll just go for the guy's lower plate, or I'm going to be waiting all day. And I got such a good rate of fire on this tank, I want to get going. So we've got an M103, a 705. Unfortunately, the Leopard prototype goes below me. And this is where this tank is just so special. Look, the double aiming kicks in and allows me to get a pinpoint shot against the Leopard prototype. And it does feel really sweet with regards to that. Absolutely awesome stuff to have that double accuracy. And it feels great to also do an intuition switch to not reset the double aiming, and then to be able to put one into the OHO there as well. I have to admit, the double aiming on this tank doesn't feel like it's that much longer. It's only 4 seconds, but remember that's improved by crew skills and things like a gun rammer, and obviously fence, because they do improve your crew skills. And so you can actually get the double aiming time of this tank down to more like about 12. But of course, if you're doing that, then you're kind of getting the regular reload time of this tank till 8. So from a percentage base, you're still having to aim longer. But what I'm trying to suggest is let's say that the cooldown time is 33% longer. Well, on 12 seconds, that's going to mean that you have to wait until 16, right? But on 3 seconds, that means you only have to wait until 4, which is only 1 extra additional second. So what I'm trying to suggest is the amount of time that you have to wait is, as an absolute value, is a lot shorter once you factor in things like the premium consumable vents and a gun rammer on this tank with Brothers in Arms. So this thing, it does feel great. I really like it. I think it's way, way better than something like an M103. It does have issues with regards to its armor. You can't angle the vehicle, over-angle, I should say, on the side armor like the M103 with its boat-shaped hull. And the vehicle doesn't have that wonderful 340 heat pen that you'd have on an M103, which is very flexible against surfaces which are angled by more than 70 degrees. I'd rather have the APCR probably against spaced armor, and maybe even sometimes against angled armor. But man, 340 heat is 340 heat, and you can do some wild things with regards to that. Okay then, so pretty solid game here for the Type 68 so far. And unfortunately, the .28 base accuracy of this tank not able to deal with the 122 TM. A little bit of a caveat I'd like to add is that all the gameplay that you're seeing today is without any of the field mods. So the performance will get better. I'm going to have more view range, I'm going to have better accuracy, I'll probably have more reverse speed on this vehicle, and that's about it. Those are the things that will improve, and maybe even I'll have the improved ground resistances on these tanks as well, which will help the mobility a little bit. Okay, so once again, a really close game like the previous one. We're down by 2,000 hit points. I'll make that like 2,600 hit points, unfortunately, as I take a hit from the Batchat caking me with gold from the side. And this is the problem with Malinovka. If you've lost most of your mediums and you didn't have a light tank that's left on your team anymore, then it's really hard to dig the tanks out of the campy spot towards the woods in the latter part of the battle. So I just got to be sneaky, I got to be patient, I just got to wait and try and look for some opportunities. We've got 9 minutes on this game, and really one of the worst things that I see people do on Malinovka is not try and just use all of that time. Or should I say they don't use all of that time to be able to wait for mistakes on the enemy team. If you can take most of the map, and you've got a lot of time to work with, the vast majority of the time, you are going to have opportunities as the enemy get frustrated and feel like they have to do something, or they just get bored of waiting to kind of draw or lose at the end of the battle. So if you can lock down your opponents, you have that time, use it. But also, don't be a player who thinks that just because you've got the time, if you have an opportunity to advance, that you don't make it. If you can comprehend the entirety of the situation and you think that it's the right thing to do, there are going to be objective times where, irrelevant of how much time you have left, you should make a play that's going to allow you to progress the battle, or to be able to pick up some good spots, pick up some good damage, isolate a tank, take it out without losing more of your hit points than you can afford to spend. And that is in fact the essence of World of Tanks, right? So unfortunately for me, the 703-2 shuts down the Object 430, but that also means that the 703-2 should be isolatable. So I'm going to go get forward. So let me talk a little bit again about the hydropneumatic suspension on this vehicle. This one actually gets 8 degrees of natural gun depression and 4 degrees extra if you use the hydropneumatic suspension. And yeah, it's clunky to say the least. It definitely makes me feel a little bit worse on a ridgeline. It also means that if my opponents get my side, or let's say that I just want to turn my turret without turning my hull in some kind of a scenario, that I will only have 8 degrees over my side. Because remember, the way that a hydropneumatic suspension works is it can only go like that. So if you're tilting your turret over the side of your tank, you can't like tilt the hydropneumatic suspension that way to be able to get the extra gun depression. Which is why the Tier 8 feels so good, because it's 12 degrees natural, no hydropneumatic suspension. So that makes the Tier 8 feel like a Kranvang. Because the Kranvang has 12 degrees natural with no hydropneumatic suspension. Whereas an STB1, I believe an STB1 gets, I think it's like 8 plus 5, or it's 8 plus 6, something like that. I think it has 13 or 14 degrees of gun depression. So it's interesting for me that Wargaming have put in these new Japanese heavies, which, let's be honest, they do look kind of medium-esque in that regard. They do kind of just look like fat Japanese mediums. But they are very similar. This vehicle, for example, it only has 10 extra alpha. Oh, actually, no, that's old statistics. I was going to say than the Type 61. I think the Type 61 used to have 390 alpha back in the day, but I think Wargaming reduced it when they changed the STB1's alpha down to 360 as well. So this vehicle has 40 extra alpha over the medium tank, I believe, at tier 9. Well, actually, it's kind of not that good of a comparison when I think about it, because the Type 61 is so different to the STB1. What this tank kind of feels like is it's like a heavy STB1 at tier 9. That's the better way to look at it. And considering how fun the STB1 can be to play at tier 10, I can tell you this one feels great at tier 9. So, do I feel that this tank is better tier for tier than the tier 8? I feel like tier 9 matchmaking is way better than tier 8 matchmaking, that's for sure. I'm not sure how all of you feel about tier 8, but tier 8 just feels as if it's either you're playing against either all tier 8 tanks or you're playing against tier 10 tanks. That's what it feels like for me. And it feels very frustrating to be a tier 8 vehicle in the matchmaking some days. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of tier 7s and tier 6s playing the game. Although I did have a nice matchup before and you saw how well that went. However, there are a lot of tier 8s playing, and so when I play tier 9, I quite often get to play against a lot of tier 8s. And this tank is so good that it doesn't really matter if I play against tier 7s. Alright, so the 7032 rears its ugly head. The Batchat gets absolutely slapped by the BZ-68, but unfortunately the Batchat's vision means that the Pantera finishes off the Skoda and the Batchat finishes off the BZ-68. I bounce a Foch, gold rounds twice. Unfortunately, I've already used my repair kit, so I have to tank 1. Am I going to tank 2 from him? Luckily, the 4th shell goes into the ridgeline. I tell my team that there's a Foch there, and unfortunately, I don't react quick enough to get the Batchat. And oh, my shell misses as we couldn't fully aim. Goodness gracious. That means that now we're in a 3 versus 6 scenario where if it had been 3 versus 5, maybe we could handle it. But uh-oh, what is this? A WZ-120 advancing very aggressively, but we spot them out. The Pantera also in the bushes there. I'm praying that the Borsig gets the shot in for me, and I actually set the WZ on fire. Wonderful. So one shot now reduces their hit points by 900, and I'm hoping that I can just manage to bait a shell from them to the top of my tank. They miss. That means it allows me to finish them off, and wow. There we go. What a shame that the Borsig didn't quite hit the Pantera. I think actually Patton the tank hit the Pantera for me. Oh, maybe the Borsig's actually using the small gun, and that's why he took 538 damage. My bad. He's using the 128, not the 150. I tell my team that the Foch was there, although I misspell it, and I say the fish was there. Well, there are probably some fishes at the back of the map in that kind of like A1 area when you think about it with all these lakes. Although I guess it depends on kind of the pH levels of the water and the runoff and whatnot. But I digress. Let's focus on what's at hand. And that is the Pantera is coming at us like a bat out of hell. The Pantera whiffs a shell there. Looks like against the Borsig. We're going to put a shot into the top of the Pantera. And ooh, this game's starting to look real good. Okay, 7032. Come on, help me, friends. Help me, friends. Help me, Borsig. Help me, Borsig. And oh no, I bounce a shot. I'm firing regular rounds as well. But luckily the 7032 misses me. And I'm going to try and push the 7032 back into the IS-3A. And I'm going to turn my hull around to him. Get behind him, and oh, no, not like this. What a shame. It wasn't to be, boys and girls, as we get finished off. But, oh, chonky game. Nearly 7,000 combined that we saw here for the Type 68 and 4 kills. Shame I missed that shot on the 7032. I got cheap. I should have fired gold, or I should have just aimed a little bit better at the guy's lower plate, but it was a high-pressure situation, that's for sure. I don't think it would have really made all of the difference. I still think that the IS-3A would have been able to finish me off, but maybe I would have had more time to like face hug the IS-3A and work them like that. So all in all, the Type 68, another banger of a tank. I really like this one. It's a great tier 9 vehicle. I rate it highly, and I recommend if you are going for the tier 10 Japanese heavy tank, the Type 71, that you do not skip this vehicle. It's very much playable, and it's a good tank that you'll get a good win ratio and good average damage with its decent damage per minute, good hull down capacity, and friendly matchmaking at tier 9. So we've got a high caliber here for the 5,800 damage that we dealt. This was nearly 7,000 combined, and then my first ace tanker in the vehicle, as we did manage to just steal the high caliber from that 7032, who was on 5,500 damage. which gives us courageous resistance so we can get that extra EXP. And even without any kind of boosting or anything, a nice profit there as we didn't fire too many gold rounds. So ladies and gents, boys and girls, those were my opinions on the tier 8 and the tier 9 Japanese heavies. Really hope you enjoyed this video today. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the tier 8 and the tier 9. Do you think that they're different enough to make them fun? Or do you think that they're just generic heavies that you're not interested in? And if you're watching this video as it's released, I'm going live all day on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And later on today at 7 o'clock UK time, there will be the first ever Japanese heavy tank tech tree showcase. And so come along, I'm going to start at tier 1, work my way up towards tier 10, and give you my final opinion of all of the vehicles along the line, so you can get an idea of which ones that you should skip, which ones you should focus on, and let you know my true opinion about the tier 10 and why it might be a little bit controversial. So really looking forward to seeing you all live now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.